Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight we're going to look at database triggers for Postgres databases. When should you use them? Actually, you should not use them. You should actually have your logic inside code instead of having it inside some triggers in your database. There are some points that can actually that is quite good. That is that it is quite fast to run triggers. It's quite fast to run stored procedures. It's fast to run SQL compared to usually code, where you usually have to connect to something and then you have to maybe also have to extract some data, and then you have to do some things in your program. Then it's much faster when you're just doing something directly inside a trigger or directly inside a function or a stored procedure. And so that is the only argument that I can see that for actually creating triggers. Another thing is that if you do not have if you don't have access to the code for some system and you need some new features, you need some more, you need to integrate with something, or you need to create you would like to have the data formatted in some other table, maybe a log table, which we are going to create right now. Then it could be cool that you can actually use database triggers and a trigger, and then you can get the data inside your log table that you actually wanted to, even though you do not have access to the code, because this is some program that you actually bought, or a third-party program. Some programs actually state in the license terms that you cannot add triggers and store procedures inside that database. You cannot put anything inside that database that can be a part of the license terms. Just so you know, before you start getting good ideas, then remember to check the license for whichever system that it is that you want to listen for trigger events on, and add your own functionality, because you can do a lot of things with function and store procedures and triggers inside a database. You can actually integrate to other systems if that is what you want to do. So shortly said, try not to do it, but this is I'll tell you how to do it anyway. So this is how to do that. First of all, if you have a table like I have right here, my table, which is the green one right here, then I have two columns, ID and name, and then I want something to happen when an event occurs on one of those columns right there. An event can be a select, it can be insert, it can be update, it can be delete. So it's one of the main commands inside a SQL statement. So if you're selecting something, you're inserting something, you're updating something, or deleting something, then you want something to happen only when you are inserting something. Then you need to create a trigger that actually targets this. And the cool thing about these triggers is that you can actually create them so they are so they only react to a certain action. So that is the action or event, action/event right here. Action or event. It's also called an event if you look in the official documentation for Postgresql. If you are playing around with triggers, then I would definitely recommend to you to look up the official documentation in postgresql.org. Another thing you need to decide if this trigger is a constraint trigger or not a constraint trigger. Constraint triggers are triggers that actually will create an exception and fail if the data does not follow the rules that you have inside your constraint. That means that, let's say that you have on my name right here, I don't want any names that is equal to Mike. Then I can create a constraint with that, and then throw an error, and that means that then the SQL will actually not be executed when the name equals to Mike. So if any error occurs inside the function which the trigger actually points to, then your SQL will actually not be called. That is how they work. Then there's the other types of triggers, which are more normal. That is the non-constraint ones. That means that you will just leave out the constraint keyword actually. In those triggers, you can just call a function, and they can do whatever. They can do whatever you want to. They can insert another row inside another table if that's what you want to. You can also manipulate some other data. In other tables, it's only up to your imagination what you want to happen, because these functions that you create, they actually you can write them in something called procedural language in PL SQL for Postgres. I'll show an example of this in just a minute. So it's actually, you can actually create a whole program inside a trigger if that's what you want. So you can you have logic expressions, and of course you also have the SQL. So it's actually quite powerful what you can do in a trigger. But just because you can do it, it doesn't mean that you actually should do it. Then we have a when condition right here. So inside your trigger, you will say when should this trigger be active, or when should this trigger call the function that is mentioned in the bottom of the trigger. So that is what the when condition is used for. And in the when condition, you can refer to new or old, and those references are actually the old row or the new row after the update after the update actually, because we have those two references, and those two references, of course, when you're inserting a row, then you would only have a new row. You would not have an old row. The row is not there before, and when you're deleting a row, then you would not have a new row. Then you would not have a new reference. You would only have an old reference. I'll show examples of this in just a minute, just so you know. Then we have then you can choose whether the trigger should be executed for the whole statement, that means once, or should it be executed for each row affected by the SQL that has been run through on this table right here. The most normal thing that I've seen is actually on each row. So the usual example is that you want something happen for each time a row is being manipulated. And then in the end, you need to mention a function. So we need to point at some function that should be called when this triggers conditions are met and the type of event, of course, is met. And this function, which is down at the bottom right here, it needs to have the return type trigger. If it has any other return type, it cannot be. You can actually not create the trigger based on that function. You will get an error from Postgres. It will give you an error and say that the function does not exist. So if you get an error that says function does not exist, even though it actually does exist, please try to check the return type and make sure that it says trigger and not like a boolean or something else. This is a trap that I've walked into a couple of times. So then you can run SQL or a procedural language inside the function. So this is actually the flow. We have an event, we have a trigger, and then we have a function that is being executed by the trigger. Before we get started, let us look at how can you actually get a Postgres database up and running very fast. You need to, I would definitely recommend you to use Docker. So let us just go to Docker Hub and then Postgres. I'll just show you that. It's right here. This is the official Postgres image that we have right here, and there are some cool Docker Compose right here. So you have this Docker Compose syntax right here, and here you will get your database. That is the DB name right here, the DB service name. That is your Postgres database, and then you have your adminer. The adminer is an awesome web administration for web interface for Postgres and also for MySQL. If you haven't checked it out, I would definitely recommend you to check it out, and then you can start up these two or these three right here, and then you can have access to the adminer interface with port 8080. I would also recommend you to map out the Postgres ports on your DB image, because then you can connect with, for instance, IntelliJ's database consoles and the database tools from IntelliJ Ultimate, which I'm using right here. If you're using the Community Edition, you will not have access to the database functionality from IntelliJ. So I've already created a project right here. I'll just show you what I created. The reason why I created this Java Spring project right here was because it's much easier for me to have to create a table with the JPN entities, because I've done it so often and so many times. So instead of actually creating the SQL, then I was actually using JPA and Hibernate to actually map this into the tables that I'm using right here. I create a new table right here, a new project. If you're much better with SQL, or if you want to use the adminer interface to create the tables instead, then of course I understand you. It will probably also be easier and faster in most situations. But I chose Spring Initializer, new project, Java 18, and then I ticked off Lombok right here, and I chose JPA. I ticked off JPA right there, and then I added the Postgres driver, which is right there. pressed finish, and then I ended up with this project right here. Of course, I had to configure this project also. Let me just show that. Of course, you have to configure it with some nice YAML right here. Spring JPA, Postgres, show all of SQLs. Yes, please do so. DDL update. This is important because it means that every time whenever I run my Java application, then if I change some JPA entities, then the tables will automatically be updated for me and look like, and they will actually always be synchronized with my Java entities. So that's pretty cool. If you don't know anything about JPA, definitely watch some of my videos about JPA instead. This is how to set up the data source, localhost right now, and port 5432. And my username is Postgres, and my password is Mike right now. Let me just show you the Docker Compose file right here, because the only changes from what you just saw before is that I mapped out port 5432, and then I can connect to it with my database view inside IntelliJ Ultimate by adding a new data source, choosing Postgres right there. If you don't have the Postgres drivers already, then you will get a yellow bar in the bottom. Then you just press yes, please download the drivers, and then you will get the drivers, and then you'll be happy. So it is quite easy with IntelliJ, and that's why I'm using it. My Java class is just for fun. Let us just look at those. I have this is my Java class right here, table tennis rank, and it is a table at the entity, and then I have created an ID right here that uses a sequence and a sequence generator. If you don't know what a sequence is, then it's just something that will provide you a unique number, and then I will use the interval that you have right here, allocation size 100. That means that every time you will call next value on your sequence, then you will get a number that is 100 larger than the number that was actually in the sequence before. So a sequence inside a database is just a sequence generator is just something that will provide you with a new number every time that is higher than the previous number, and you usually use that for generating our IDs automatically. That is the ID. Here we have the name, we have club name, we have points, and those are all columns, and I've also chosen some definitions right there, text, and integer, and then I get my my table tennis table. My table tennis rank table. And then we have the log table right here. This is the one that I want to fill out with a trigger function. I want every time I insert a row inside my table tennis rank table, then I want the log table also to have a row with along with the timestamp, so I know which values was in my table tennis rank table at a given time. So that was the task, and I've already run a unit test based on this. I have a unit test right here where I auto-wired in this repository. This means that I already have my tables. Sorry for that. That's just I had to cheat a little bit, or else it will take too long, and people will fall asleep if they didn't do that already. But here we have it. So here we have the two tables: ID, club, name, points, and we can also see here is the rank table right here, club, name, points, timestamp. And we can also see the sequences. They're actually objects that we can actually see right there. So those are my sequences, and you can also play with those by getting the next val, using the next val function, select next val, and then in brackets the name of the sequence, and then you will actually get the next. Yeah, let us just do that actually. So I have my consoles right here. First, I've actually already created a trigger, so let us just start by deleting the trigger. So now I deleted that trigger right here. I can press Control Enter. Then I'm just executing this part of the SQL right here. Then I actually also create a function. I want to drop that function also. So now my function is gone, my trigger is gone, and what do we have left then? We have some rows in the database that I want to remove. So select. Okay, so you can see right now I don't have any rows in my tables. They are all deleted. And if I want to use the sequence, yeah, we actually have an example of it right here. So here we have a next val command right here. Let me just try to show you. If you want to play with your sequence, then you can just say select from. You can just say select next val like this. And then you get the number. You can see right now I'm at 2120. If I run this once again, then I would get the number that is 100 higher. That's just how the sequences work. So now, first of all, let us just First of all, if I insert something inside my table tennis rank right now, nothing will actually happen. What I want to happen is that I want to create a trigger. I want to have a trigger on table tennis rank. And let us just remove this or replace. That is why it complains a bit. And so I'm creating a trigger. I want to say that it's after insert. So after a row has been inserted on this table right here, table tennis rank, then I want something to happen. For each row that was inserted, let us just add a condition. When name like Mike, then it should execute this function right here with these, with the values from the insert statement. When it's insert, you don't need to use new and old. You just mention the columns right here. So here we have Mike's function, but I've not created this function yet, so I need to create that first. If I try to run this right now, then I'll get an error. It says, the function does not exist. You will also get this error if you forgot to say that the return type should be trigger. And here I'm creating my function. Create or replace function, public Mike's function. Always mention the schema. If you don't know if you should mention your schemas in your SQLs or not, then always mention your schemas, because it is more concise, and it will remove a lot of mistakes and you would just save yourself a lot of pain in the long run. Always mention schemas. That it is also called fully qualified name. So if you look up and if you see someone at Stack Overflow saying, "Have you tried the fully qualified name?" then that just means that you need to add the schema in front. Schema plus your function or your table or whatever you're dealing with inside your Postgres database. Here we have create function, or replace it if it already exists, and it needs to have the return type trigger. If it returns something else like a boolean or something else, then drop it right away and create a new trigger that returns trigger, because else it would not work as a trigger function. And here we then say as, and then this is just a logical name. This just means begin and end right here. So this is the procedural language that we are adding right here. So here we have begin ends, and it is of the language procedural language Postgresql. That is what we have right here. Then I'm inserting one row into the log. I'm inserting into the log table. Look, this is my log table, and here I'm inserting all of the fields plus the timestamp that we have right here. And here we have the values. So first I get a new sequence from the log table. Then I'm inserting the club name, the name, and here we can actually see I'm using the new reference. I could also, that's because that's just because I can. You can use the new, the old references when you are dealing with a trigger function. And here we have new points. Look, I'm multiplying with 2 just to show that I can actually manipulate with data. I don't need to insert the exact same data. I can just do something else if that's what I want to. And another thing you need to remember to return null when you are dealing with a function that returns a trigger like this. If you don't do that, then you will also get an error. You will get an error actually when you try to insert something. And if you get an error in the function, then the insert will actually be cancelled. So that means that if you try to insert something into a table, you see nothing happens and you get all of these weird errors, then it's because someone made an error inside a function, and which is triggered on inserts, for instance. And that is also why you should not use triggers at all, because it is very difficult to debug, especially if you choose to. You can actually choose to replace. You can actually have a trigger replacing the original SQL totally. So you can actually have something called an alter. Here we have this is a syntax taken from the official documentation, and you have something called instead of. So instead of before or after an event, then you can say instead of that event. So every time, for instance, insert is being called, then your trigger function is being called instead. And that is really confusing when you try to debug a system where someone placed the trigger like that. And that is why I definitely don't use the triggers. This is just to show you how it works. This is just to show you what you can do. If you should be also unlucky that you have a system where you don't have the code to. Okay, now let us create this. We talked a lot now. Let us try to create this. That was the function. Let us create the trigger. That was the trigger. And let us just check that we don't have any data still. No data, no data. Let us insert Mike, the trigger programmer, And 50 points, look at it, I got 50 points right here. That means that in the log table, this is the normal rank table. Here I got 50 points, and then let us look in the rank log in the table instead. Here I got 100 points. So our trigger works. Let us just try for fun with some other name. I once knew someone named Lena that was really, really good at playing in table tennis. She'll probably have 200 or something like that. And the club here, that could be Smell. So that's the city. And let us try to insert this data now. And then we go. Then we can see right now that the data is inside the table tennis rank. But the row is not inside the log table, and that is because the trigger's when condition has not been met. It needs to say Mike right here, right? That's quite awesome, quite cool. Then we have my function right there. And of course we can also say that it should be after update instead. So now I'm changing my trigger. So now it works on update, and I can also try remove my when condition. It already exists, create or replace, like this. And then for some reason, Intelligent doesn't know how to handle that. Does not know this is totally valid, but it can execute it, and that was fine. But for some reason, it says, "Oh, there's a lot of things wrong." It did not expect all of those things right there. Oh, was there something with dialect? Ah, okay. Let's see if that helped. It did not help. No, that was. Okay, that's how it is. Let us try to update. So first of all, we will just select. We have Mike. And then we have Lena with 50 and 200. Then I want to update that table and set all of the points to 100. I just ran that. Let us see that now that all of the points are 100. Let us see in the log now. Now we have two more rows in the log. We have one right here that says 200, and you can also see the timestamps. It's like 5 minutes later than the first timestamp right here. Now we have 200 points for both Lena and Mike, the trigger program right here, because this is a log table, so we can have, of course, my name can be there many times. This is so we can see what was the situation at any given time. So that is what I wanted to show you. I just want to show how to create triggers and what the possibilities are in Postgres. And then I want to tell you, don't do that. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great evening. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.